You don't really expect your morning coffee to be interrupted by a 12-foot carnivore calling you uncle. But then again, nothing about working on Station Epsilon ever went the way Dr. Marcus Hale expected. It started with the growl, low, resonant, and far too close for comfort. Marcus had been leaning over a cracked thermoregulator, muttering about lazy technicians and outdated schematics, when the airlock to Habitat Base 6 slammed open. What pattered through was a wall of muscle and fur, mottled silver hide gleaming under the harsh fluorescence, teeth like a butcher's dream catching the light. The predator's name, according to the station manifest, was Thrak of the Shattered Spine. An apex hunter from Zor Prime. A species that made grizzlies look like plush toys. And for reasons that defied every scientific paper Marcus had skimmed, it had developed the alarming habit of visiting him. Uncle, the beast rumbled, each syllable shaped by its translator collar, the tone bizarrely polite. Its amber eyes fixed on Marcus, who was now very aware that the nearest weapon was a wrench too small to dent a lunchbox. Not now, Marcus said, trying to sound braver than he felt. I'm busy making sure this station doesn't explode. The predator tilted its head, ears flicking. Then it crouched low, a posture Marcus had learned usually preceded either a leap or a very bad day. But instead of lunging, Thrak swung its massive skull toward the corridor. Something shuffled behind it. Something smaller. A squeak, a chirp, and then 3 furballs tumbled into the bay like overgrown wolf pups on roller skates. Each one was the size of a St. Bernard and twice as clumsy, with paws that slapped against the deck plating and little tusks that hadn't grown sharp yet. Marcus froze. The smell of scorched metal and lubricants clung to the air, but underneath it came the musk of raw animal. His brain finally caught up. Cubs. Thraka's cubs. The enormous predator nudged them forward with its snout until they clustered at Marcus's boots. Then, in a voice that could have been mistaken for reverence if not for the mechanical undertones of the translator, it said, Uncle Death. Care. Teach. Marcus dropped his wrench. It clanged on the deck, echoing like a gunshot. I'm sorry, what? The cubs yipped, gnawed on his shoelaces, and one tried to climb his leg like a tree trunk. Thrak repeated, slower this time, as though explaining gravity to a particularly dim rock. Uncle Death. You care. You keep. Teach fight. Teach kill. Marcus's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He glanced at the nearest camera node, wishing the station's AI was awake enough to tell him this was a hallucination caused by caffeine withdrawal. But the AI was still in low-power diagnostics. And the giant carnivore blocking the door wasn't a dream. The situation would have been funny, if it weren't also potentially lethal. Station Epsilon was already a joke among the colonies, the galactic equivalent of a neglected bus stop, orbiting a mineral-dead rock, staffed by the unlucky and the unwanted. The idea that one of its only human residents was now being recruited as babysitter to a species known as the Devourers of Suns was the kind of comedy that ended with someone's obituary. Marcus raised both hands slowly, palms outward. Listen, big guy. I appreciate the confidence. But I'm not exactly predator material. You killed 3 raiders, Thrak growled. Snap like brittle shells. Cubs saw. Marcus groaned. That incident again. It had been self-defense. 2 smugglers and a mercenary had cornered him during a resupply run, and a desperate shove had sent one into an airlock. Another tripped over his own grenade. The third had gotten too close to Marcus's elbow. The rumor mill had promptly dubbed him Uncle Death, a nickname he hated but apparently one the predators took literally. The cubs nipped at his boots, their little tails whipping like metronomes. Marcus tried nudging them away, but one latched onto his trouser leg with teeth sharp enough to shred fabric. Hey! No chewing the engineer! Thraka's jaws opened in what Marcus could only interpret as a grin. The beast lowered its massive frame until its golden eyes were level with his. They trust you. I trust you. My hunt calls. You keep them. And just like that, the predator turned. The deck shuddered under its weight as it padded back toward the airlock. The hatch hissed open, and Marcus realized with dawning horror that Srak fully intended to leave. Wait! You can't just dump them here! Marcus shouted, stumbling after. But the airlock had already sealed. Through the porthole he saw Sraka's silhouette vanish into the docking tunnel, bound for whatever blood-soaked crusade awaited. The cubs yipped again. One of them dragged his dropped wrench into a corner, gnawing on it like a chew toy. Another was pawing at the thermal regulator he'd been repairing, claws screeching against the fragile casing. Marcus pressed his forehead to the cold metal wall. This is not happening. But it was. And it was only going to get worse. By the time Marcus wrestled the cubs away from the machinery, his coveralls were shredded, his boots had bite marks, and his left wrist was smeared with what he hoped was engine grease. He managed to herd them into the unused research lab, which was the closest thing to a playpen available on Station Epsilon. He locked the door behind him and stared at the trio as they bounded across the lab benches. Test tubes shattered. A centrifuge was knocked over. One cub discovered the emergency eyewash station and promptly sprayed its siblings with recycled water. Marcus rubbed his temples. He was an engineer, not a zookeeper. Certainly not a surrogate father to carnivorous death beasts. And yet, here he was. The absurdity of it all would have been hilarious, if not for the consequences. The Mzor weren't known for forgiveness. If he failed to keep these cubs alive, their mother, or father, or whatever Srak classified as, would come back. And Marcus suspected the punishment wouldn't involve a strongly worded letter. He slumped into a chair, glaring at the cubs as they wrestled each other into a pile of fur and snarls. Why me? No answer came. The next morning, or what passed for morning on a station that spun around a dead rock, Marcus woke to the sound of howling. Not ordinary howling. Alien howling. The kind that rattled the vents and made the hairs on the back of his neck salute. He stumbled into the lab to find the cubs perched on the ceiling struts. Don't ask him how they got up there. One had somehow wedged itself between two coolant pipes, another was gnawing on a dangling wire, and the third was hanging upside down, tail lashing like a pendulum. Get down from there! Marcus shouted, waving his arms. They ignored him. So he did the only thing he could think of. He bribed them with ration packs. The cubs tumbled down in a blur of claws and teeth, shredding the vacuum-sealed packages before he could even open them. He watched them devour the paste like it was ambrosia. At least feeding them was easy. For now. That's when the comm system crackled to life. A voice oozed through, nasal and sharp. Dr. Hale? This is Commander Vela. I trust you're maintaining order on Epsilon? Marcus winced. The commander was technically his boss, though boss, in this case meant bureaucrat who hadn't left her office in 2 years. Define order, Marcus muttered. What was that? Nothing, Commander. Everything's under control. He eyed the cubs, one of whom was attempting to crawl into the ventilation shaft. Completely fine. Good, Vela sniffed. Because inspectors from the Galactic Council are scheduled to arrive in 48 hours. If they find anything improper, this station's funding will be cut permanently. Marcus swallowed hard. Improper. Like 3 alien cubs chewing through the power conduits? Yeah, that qualified. Understood, he said weakly. The comm clicked off. Marcus turned slowly toward the cubs. They stared back, eyes glowing in the dim light, muzzles smeared with ration paste. He exhaled, long and slow. 2 days. He just had to keep them alive, hidden, and preferably not eating the inspectors. How hard could it be? Marcus had survived reactor leaks, drunken brawls, and once even a fire in zero gravity caused by a bored technician with a plasma torch. But nothing compared to the sound of 3 predator cubs discovering the station's recycling system. The howl ripped through the ventilation ducts like a banshee with asthma. Marcus bolted upright, banging his head on the underside of his bunk. By the time he staggered into the corridor, half asleep and wholly unprepared, the emergency lights had already flickered to red. He followed the racket to the recycler chamber. The door was ajar. Inside, chaos reigned. One cub had somehow gotten its head stuck in the hatch that normally digested food waste. Another was pawing gleefully at the conveyor belt that shuttled scraps toward the compactor. The third? Marcus froze. The third had discovered the eject chute. Its stubby snout was pressed against the transparent barrier that separated harmless curiosity from instant launch into vacuum. Marcus's stomach clenched. He lunged forward, slamming the override. The machine groaned, halted, and the belts whirred to a reluctant stop. He yanked the cub out of the hatch, wiped the muck off its fur, and then dragged the other away from the chute. They barked happily, tails thrashing, as if this were the best game in the galaxy. This, Marcus panted, is why humans invented babysitters. Of course, babysitters usually weren't expected to keep their charges from depressurizing themselves. He herded the trio back into the research lab and sealed the door with a code so complex he'd forget it by lunchtime. Then he collapsed into a chair, staring at them as they yipped and wrestled across the floor. The cubs were getting stronger. Faster. Smarter. Yesterday they could barely climb a bench. Today they were launching themselves onto shelves with disturbing accuracy. Tomorrow? Marcus didn't want to find out. And the inspectors were coming. 40 hours left. He groaned, massaging his temples. Okay, Hale. You've got two choices. Hide them, or train them not to kill everything that moves. Neither seemed likely. The first complication arrived not with claws or teeth, but with wheels. Delivery! Sang a cheerful synthetic voice. Marcus blinked at the screen above his workstation. The supply drone hovered in the docking bay, its cargo modules blinking. He hadn't ordered anything. Supplies weren't due for another week. Curious, he authorized docking. The drone zipped in, extended its loader arms, and deposited 3 crates labeled in bold crimson glyphs, property of Mzor hunting clans. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He didn't even need to open them to guess what was inside. Sure enough, when he pried the lid off the first crate, he found slabs of raw meat, still steaming, still dripping. The smell hit like a freight shuttle. The cubs perked up instantly, eyes glowing. They yelled, barreling toward him like furry missiles. Whoa, back up! Marcus stumbled, nearly toppling into the crate. But it was too late. The cubs dove in, snouts first, devouring hunks of meat with wet snarls. He gagged. He was an engineer, not a butcher. His diet consisted of ration paste, nutrient cubes, and the occasional contraband chocolate bar. Watching 3 predator toddlers dismantle a side of alien ox was an experience his nightmares would be dining on for years. The second crate contained more meat. The third? Marcus hesitated. Inside was a bundle of metallic collars, each humming faintly. Training devices. He recognized the design, neural conditioning tech, banned in most civilized systems. Clearly the Mzor had different standards. He picked one up, turning it over. If the cubs wore these, they'd be controllable, obedient even. But the idea of strapping shock collars onto creatures that trusted him made his stomach churn. He dropped the collar back into the crate. Not happening. The cubs burped in unison, bloodied muzzles gleaming. Marcus sighed. This was escalating faster than a reactor meltdown. By evening, word had spread. Not about the cubs specifically, but about something. Station Epsilon's grapevine was less a vine and more a fungal infection. It spread fast, in all directions, and smelled faintly of rot. By dinner, half the staff were whispering about strange noises in the vents, unregistered deliveries, and Hale up to something again. He caught 2 technicians peeking into the research wing, whispering loudly about genetic experiments and illegal pets. He slammed the door shut on their faces. Mind your own business, he barked. They snickered and wandered off. Marcus slumped against the door. This was bad. If anyone else discovered the cubs before the inspectors arrived, it was over. The station would lose funding, and he'd lose his head, figuratively if the council was merciful, literally if the Mzor weren't. He rubbed his face. Okay, think. You've got brains. You've got tools. Use them. That night, While the cubs snored in a heap, Marcus sketched plans on his datapad. A containment system, something that would keep them hidden, safe, and maybe even entertained. By dawn, his quarters looked like a scrapyard had exploded. He'd scavenged old cargo netting, spare plating, and half a dozen hollow projectors from the storage bay. Piece by piece, he cobbled together a simulation chamber, a holographic environment to trick the cubs into thinking they were roaming the hunting fields of Mzor Prime. When he activated it, the lab shimmered. Suddenly, the walls were no longer sterile metal but a dense alien forest, complete with artificial scents and rustling leaves. The cubs woke, blinked, and then bounded into the illusion, tails whipping with excitement. They pounced at phantom prey, rolled in fake grass, and howled at holographic moons. Marcus exhaled in relief. It worked. For now. Enjoy your playground, little monsters, he muttered, sinking into a chair. Just don't eat the projectors. Of course, 5 minutes later, one cub tried to gnaw the emitter. But at least they were distracted. He almost believed he could manage it, until the inspector's shuttle arrived early. Marcus was in the middle of repairing a projector chewed halfway to death when the comm crackled. Dr. Hale. Commander Vela's voice dripped acid. The council inspectors have docked. Report to the main hub immediately. Marcus nearly dropped the emitter. His throat went dry. Already? They weren't due until. No. Vela snapped. The comm went silent. Marcus stared at the cubs, who were currently tearing apart a holographic deer with joyous snarls. His heart thudded. If the inspectors saw them, it was over. He needed a plan, and fast. The inspectors were exactly what Marcus feared, two beings with clipboards and zero humor. One was human, tall and skeletal, with the expression of someone who'd been constipated since birth. The other was a crystalline entity whose body glowed faintly, every movement chiming like a wineglass. Both radiated the bureaucratic authority of people who could end careers with a single checkmark. They trailed behind Commander Vela, who oozed smugness. This, Vela announced, sweeping a hand at the hub, is Station Epsilon. Perfectly orderly, perfectly compliant. Marcus forced a smile, though his stomach twisted. He kept glancing toward the research wing, praying the cubs stayed quiet. The inspectors began their tour, poking into labs, scanning corridors, interrogating technicians. Marcus followed like a condemned man trailing his executioner. Halfway through, the crystalline inspector paused, head tilting. Unusual auditory disturbances. It chimed. Origin Research Wing. Marcus's heart nearly stopped. Oh, just malfunctioning vents, he blurted. Old station, you know. Makes all sorts of noises. Nothing dangerous. The human inspector frowned. We'll verify. No need, Marcus said quickly, stepping in front of them. His grin felt like it might crack his skull. Actually, I insist. Let me handle it personally. Engineer's pride. Vela's eyes narrowed. The inspectors exchanged a look. Marcus's pulse hammered. One wrong word and they'd be through that door, face to face with 3 ravenous alien cubs. He needed a distraction. Something big. Something insane. So he did the stupidest thing he'd ever done in his life. He hit the fire alarm. Klaxons blared. Sprinklers hissed. Red lights strobed. The inspectors staggered back, shielding their eyes. Reactor breach! Marcus shouted over the chaos. Protocol requires evacuation. Everyone to the docking bay. Panic rippled through the hub. Crews scattered like spooked pigeons. The inspectors were swept along, shouting objections, while Vela screeched orders no one heard. Marcus darted the opposite way, sprinting for the research wing. Inside, the cubs were howling at the alarm, claws raking the holographic trees. One had already chewed through a sprinkler head, spraying water everywhere. Marcus slammed the door shut and sagged against it, chest heaving. He bought time, but at what cost? The inspectors would demand answers. Vela would demand his head. And the cubs were growing harder to contain by the hour. Marcus stared at the trio as they bounded through the false forest, muzzles wet, eyes wild. Uncle Death, Srac had called him. Guardian. Teacher. Caretaker. Marcus buried his face in his hands. He was in way over his head. And the worst was still to come. Marcus had expected fallout, but not this fast. He barely caught his breath when the comm system barked again, Vela's voice shrill enough to peel paint. Dr. Hale! Report to the command deck immediately. Now. Her tone carried a venomous edge. She knew he'd triggered the alarm. Worse, she suspected why. Marcus glanced at the cubs. They had finally quieted, huddled together in a soggy pile after their sprinkler adventure. Their fur clung in damp clumps, eyes glowing faintly in the dim emergency lights. They looked almost innocent, if you ignored the fact that one had bitten a hole through his chair leg. He exhaled sharply. Stay. No chewing. No killing. Please. They wagged their tails, as if promising nothing of the sort. Marcus straightened his coveralls, shoved his data pad under one arm, and marched toward the command deck like a man heading to his own trial. Vela was waiting, flanked by the two inspectors. The crystalline one glowed brighter than before, its faceted body pulsing in irritation. The human inspector tapped his clipboard with the grim efficiency of an undertaker measuring a coffin. Explain, the human demanded. A false alarm during inspection violates 17 Council regulations. Marcus forced a grin. Better safe than sorry, right? Systems this old sometimes glitch. Safety protocols overreact. Vela's lips curled. Or perhaps, she said smoothly, you were hiding something. The inspectors turned as one, sharp as hunting birds. Marcus's pulse pounded. One wrong move, and they'd be marching straight to the research wing. I'm hiding nothing, he said quickly. In fact, let me show you the diagnostics myself. Full transparency. He activated his datapad, projecting a flurry of schematics. Warnings and red flags scrolled across the display, half real, half the product of Marcus's frantic midnight coding spree. He explained with rapid-fire jargon, burying them in technicalities about reactor flux harmonics, magnetic shearing tolerances, and thermal latency irregularities that didn't exist outside his imagination. The human frowned, but the crystalline inspector seemed briefly distracted, its facets dimming as it processed the torrent of nonsense. Vela, however, was not fooled. Her gaze pinned him like a knife. Enough, she snapped. Inspectors, I insist we examine the research wing. Hale has been restricting access, and I believe we'll find the truth there. Marcus's blood ran cold. The inspectors nodded. Agreed. No! Marcus blurted, then winced at how desperate it sounded. I mean, protocol requires I prepare the lab first. Hazardous materials, sensitive calibrations. The crystalline inspector's body chimed in suspicion. Delay noted. Transparency compromised. They started walking toward the research wing. Marcus's chest tightened. He couldn't stop them without making things worse. He couldn't stall much longer. And behind that sealed door waited 3 alien cubs who'd view unfamiliar inspectors as chew toys. Panic swirled. He had seconds to think. Seconds to act. And then came the howl. It ripped through the corridor like thunder, rattling panels, vibrating the floor beneath their boots. Everyone froze. The howl wasn't from the cubs. It was deeper. Louder. It carried the resonance of lungs the size of a cargo shuttle. Marcus's heart lurched. He knew that sound. Srac. The predator had returned. The inspector spun, eyes wide. Vela went pale. Marcus ran. He sprinted down the corridor, heart hammering, and slammed into the research lab's door. It hissed open, and there stood Srac, hunched in the doorway like a nightmare sculpted from muscle and fawn. The cubs yipped, bounding toward their parent, who lowered its massive head and nuzzled them with surprising gentleness. Then Srac's gaze rose, met Marcus's, and then slid past him, straight to the inspectors rounding the corner. The predator bared its teeth in a grin that was anything but friendly. Threat, it growled. The inspectors froze, their professionalism cracking under the reality of a 12-foot apex predator glaring at them. Marcus threw himself between them, arms spread wide. Wait! They're not a threat! Srac tilted its head. You keep. You teach. You protect. Why protect them? The inspectors looked at each other in panic. Vela seized the moment. You see? She shrieked. He's harboring unregistered aliens. Dangerous beasts. This station is compromised. Her voice echoed, dripping with triumph. Marcus's chest burned. He could feel the walls closing in. If he didn't act now, everything, his career, the Cubs, maybe the entire station, would collapse. Enough! He shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Everyone turned. Even Srac's ears flicked. Marcus drew in a breath, heart pounding, and spoke with a steadiness he didn't feel. These Cubs aren't a threat. They're a responsibility. You call me Uncle Death? Fine. But I'm also Uncle Life. I've kept them safe. I've fed them. I've kept them from tearing this station apart, and I'll keep doing it because someone has to. You inspectors want compliance? You want order? Then look. I've done what your regulations can't. I earned their trust. The Cubs barked in agreement, clustering at his legs. One pawed at his boot, eyes wide and unblinking. The crystalline inspector hesitated, facets pulsing in thought. The human's pen hovered over the clipboard. But Vela wasn't done. She stepped forward, eyes blazing. He's endangering us all. Those monsters will grow. They'll kill us in our sleep. I demand immediate termination of Hale's command and the destruction of those things. The Cub snarled at her, tiny fangs bared. Srac loomed taller, growling low, a sound that made the air tremble. Marcus's instincts screamed. Vela had just declared war on a predator parent. And she was standing too close. Srac lunged. It happened in a blur, a flash of fur and teeth, the corridor shaking as Srac launched forward. Vela shrieked, stumbling back. The inspectors scattered. Marcus's body moved before his brain did. He hurled himself sideways, slamming into Srac's chest. The predator's momentum carried them both into the wall with bone-rattling force. Pain exploded across Marcus's ribs. But he held on, gripping fistfuls of coarse fur, shoving, straining. Stop! He gasped. Not them! Not like this! Srac's golden eyes burned inches from his face. For a heartbeat, Marcus was certain he'd be torn in half. Then, slowly, the predator stilled. Its lips curled back from its teeth, but it didn't strike. The Cubs whined, tugging at their parents' legs. Marcus sagged, chest heaving. He'd done the unthinkable, tackled the predator head-on and lived. Listen to me, he rasped. If you kill them, the Council will brand your species a menace. They'll wipe you out. But if you show them these Cubs can live with us, trust us, you'll have allies. Not enemies. The inspectors watched, stunned. Vela scrambled backward, pale as ash. Srac's gaze lingered, unreadable. Then, with a rumble like distant thunder, it stepped back. The Cubs rushed to Marcus, nuzzling him, whining in relief. The predator's voice vibrated through the corridor. You protect. You teach. You live. Uncle Death proves. The crystalline inspector flickered, recording every word. The human scribbled furiously. Vela's mouth worked soundlessly, fury and disbelief warring on her face. Marcus collapsed against the wall, chest burning, vision swimming. He'd won a moment, but not the war. Because now the inspectors had a decision to make. And the future of Station Epsilon, and maybe humanity's place with the predators, balanced on the edge of their pens. The silence after the confrontation was almost unbearable. Marcus leaned against the wall, ribs aching, sweat stinging his eyes. The inspectors stood frozen, two bureaucrats caught in the aftershock of something too wild to fit into their regulations. Vela trembled with rage, but even she didn't dare step closer to Srac now. The Cubs broke the silence first, yipping and pawing at Marcus's legs as if cheering their unlikely hero. He wiped his forehead with a grimy sleeve, trying to find words. So, I guess the question is, what now? The crystalline inspector's body chimed with subdued notes. Observations confirm unprecedented trust bond between apex predator species and human subject. This requires reconsideration. The human inspector scowled, pen hovering. Reconsideration is not authorization. This is a liability. An apex predator aboard a low-tier station violates a dozen council statutes. Vela seized on that. Exactly. You heard him. Shut this down before it kills us all. Srak growled low. The deck vibrated. Vela snapped her mouth shut. Marcus pushed off the wall, standing straighter despite the pain gnawing at his ribs. He looked directly at the inspectors. You came here to see if this station was worth funding. You wanted order, compliance, efficiency. Fine. Here's what I'll show you: chaos, yes, but also proof. Proof that we can connect with species no one thought possible. Proof that humans aren't just good at surviving, we're good at adapting. Even with predators like these. He gestured to the cubs, who sat obediently now, watching him with wide golden eyes. Look at them. They trust me. Not because of regulations, not because of tech, but because I treated them with respect. If you cut funding, you lose more than a station. You lose the chance to turn fear into cooperation. You lose the chance to build something new. The crystalline inspector hummed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. The human inspector hesitated, then slowly lowered his pen. But before either could speak, Vela hissed. You fools! He's manipulating you. These things are killers. They'll grow. They'll hunt. They'll. Her tirade cut off with a sharp snap. Marcus turned. One of the cubs had clamped gently onto Vela's boot. Not biting, just holding, eyes unblinking. She went rigid, too terrified to move. The cub released her and padded back to Marcus's side, tail wagging. The message was clear, it had chosen its side. Marcus couldn't help it, he laughed. The sound startled everyone, even himself. You see? They're already better judges of character than most people I know. Srak rumbled, a sound halfway between amusement and approval. Uncle Death teaches well. The inspectors withdrew to deliberate. They sealed themselves in the conference chamber with datapads, murmuring in hushed tones. Marcus, bruised and exhausted, sat cross-legged on the floor of the hub with the cubs curled around him like furry heaters. Srak loomed nearby, watchful but, for the first time, relaxed. Vela paced at the far end, muttering darkly, shooting daggers with her eyes. No one paid her attention. Minutes stretched into an hour. The cubs dozed, tails twitching in dreams. Marcus's eyelids drooped, but he forced himself to stay awake. The fate of everything balanced in that chamber. Finally, the doors hissed open. The crystalline inspector emerged first, its facets glimmering with an inner light. The human followed, expression unreadable. They stood before the assembled crew, before Marcus and Srak, and spoke. The Council recognizes Station Epsilon as an experimental integration site. The crystalline voice rang. Funding shall be maintained. Oversight shall be increased. And the relationship between human subject Marcus Hale and Mzor progeny shall be documented as precedent. The human inspector added stiffly. Conditions apply. Containment protocols. Cooperative training programs. Full transparency. But the potential here outweighs the risk. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Relief surged through him so hard it made his vision blur. The cubs yipped in triumph, tails thumping against the deck. Srak lowered its massive head until its muzzle nearly brushed Marcus's shoulder. Uncle Death proves worthy, it growled. Cubs stay. You teach. Marcus blinked. Wait, stay? As in, permanently? Sraka's grin showed far too many teeth. Yes. Marcus buried his face in his hands. He'd saved the station, earned the Council's recognition, and shackled himself to a lifetime of babysitting alien carnivores. Life on Station Epsilon changed fast after that. Within days, engineers were rerouting corridors to create safer enclosures. Scientists arrived, eager to study the cubs. Trainers brought approved equipment, non-lethal, humane, to help shape their instincts. And everywhere Marcus went, whispers followed him. Some in awe, some in fear, most in disbelief. Uncle Death. They called him openly now, but the name had shifted, less rumor, more legend. The cubs thrived. With Marcus guiding them, they learned boundaries, not to chew on conduits, not to pounce on unsuspecting technicians, not to dismantle machinery just to see how it rattled. They weren't perfect, one still had a habit of stealing wrenches, but they were learning. And in quiet moments, when the station's hum softened and the stars wheeled silently outside the viewport, Marcus admitted to himself, he was proud. Against all odds, he'd turned predators into pupils. Vela, of course, was furious. She filed appeals, accusations, endless complaints. None stuck. The council's word was law, and she couldn't fight the tidal wave of publicity that came with. The first human to tame the untamable. Eventually, she resigned in disgrace. Rumor had it she took a post on some backwater mining colony. Marcus didn't waste energy thinking about her. He had enough to worry about with 3 cubs chewing on his boots. The real test came weeks later, when raiders struck again. They came out of the black like shadows, sleek ships bristling with stolen weapons. Station Epsilon's defenses were laughable at best, and panic swept the crew. Marcus found himself in the hub, alarms blaring, as red dots swarmed the scanner display. He felt the old fear rising, memories of the first attack, the one that had given him his unwanted nickname. But this time, he wasn't alone. The cubs had grown. No longer clumsy, they stood tall, muscles rippling under sleek fur, eyes burning like molten gold. Srak had returned too, drawn by the scent of battle. Marcus tightened his tool belt, hard hammering. He wasn't a soldier. But he was their teacher. Their Uncle Death. And when the raiders breached, expecting an easy target, they met something else entirely. The cubs moved with terrifying grace, coordinated as a pack. They didn't kill, they disarmed, disabled, drove the intruders back with snarls and sheer force. Marcus fought alongside them, wielding nothing but a wrench and his stubborn refusal to die. The crew rallied behind him. For the first time, Station Epsilon fought as one. When the last raider fled into the void, leaving their ships drifting in ruin, a cheer erupted. Marcus collapsed against the console, chest heaving, bruises blooming, but alive. Victorious. Srak stood over him, golden eyes gleaming. You fight. You teach fight. Cubs strong. Station strong. Uncle Death earns name. Marcus groaned, half laughing, half exhausted. Great. Now they'll never let me live it down. The cubs bounded around him, tails lashing, voices raised in howls that echoed through the station like a new anthem. In the weeks that followed, Station Epsilon transformed from a forgotten outpost into something new, a symbol. A place where predators and humans worked side by side. A place where fear turned into respect, and respect into strength. The council sent more observers, more scientists, more funding. Some came to study, some to train, some just to witness the impossible. And at the center of it all was Marcus, still an engineer, still perpetually tired, still muttering about broken regulators and chewed cables. But also something more. He'd become the bridge. The proof. The uncle, not just of death, but of survival. One night, as he sat in the observation dome, the cubs sprawled around him in a heap of fur and warmth, he finally allowed himself to smile without bitterness. He thought of the nickname he'd hated, the legend that had grown around it. Uncle Death. A joke. A curse. And now, somehow, a banner of hope. Fine, he whispered to the stars. I'll wear it. But only because you pups won't give me a choice. The cubs stirred in their sleep, one paw draping over his boot. Srak's shadow loomed quietly in the corner, ever watchful. And for the first time since he'd set foot on this rust-bucket station, Marcus felt something he hadn't in years. Belonging. Life would never be simple again. Not with predators calling him family, not with inspectors watching his every move, not with the galaxy's eyes turned suddenly toward Station Epsilon. But Marcus had learned something important. Chaos wasn't the enemy. Fear wasn't the enemy. Stagnation was. And if humanity was going to carve out its place among the stars, maybe what it needed wasn't more walls or rules. Maybe what it needed was an Uncle Death.